Hey guys, I'm Eugene Bach with Back to Jerusalem, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the southern borders of China. Now, this is a special podcast, even though it doesn't look that special. I'm actually on a hike this morning when I needed to stop, and I realized that this is the 10-year anniversary for the Back to Jerusalem podcast, or at least a 10-year anniversary for the podcast that we have been posting. We've actually had earlier podcasts that we didn't post in the same way. We kind of put them up on our website and really nowhere else. In fact, I did a trivia not too long ago for anybody that's been following Back to Jerusalem. And I asked them, when we first started our podcast, what was it called? Because it wasn't called the Back to Jerusalem podcast. We started a podcast and we got slammed on it because a lot of people felt that it was immature, a little bit adolescent in delivery. And I don't disagree with them. I mean, whenever I do my podcast, I do them on the move like I am now. You can't tell because, most people that do podcasts these days, they have a lot of equipment and staff that is kind of hiding. This is with an old phone that's probably like 5 years old that I'm doing this podcast with now. The lens is not very good. The audio is coming from my Apple earbuds, and I have a Samsung phone and Apple earbuds, so those don't even really match all the time. So the sound quality is probably not good. I don't have anybody with me. I'm just hiking with my phone as I've done all of my podcasts, and you'll be able to tell because I have the sun actually coming up here on this side. Anybody that knows anything about video would say you need to have the sun like facing you, not behind you, because it makes the video worse. Well, most of the people that follow our podcast follow by audio. They usually download it from wherever they get the podcast. And I've been told that I have a radio face. So not everybody wants to see, me when I'm just sharing. Basically, I think a lot of people like to listen to the Back to Jerusalem podcast as they're driving in their car, maybe working out at the gym, maybe at their office, doing the things that they do on a regular basis, just kind of passing time and wanting to know how they can pray for the Back to Jerusalem vision and how they can pray for the things that BTJ is involved in. And as I was out here hiking, I saw a message that came from our U.S. office that said, hey, don't know if you knew it or not, but this is the 10-year anniversary, which is true. It's the 10-year anniversary of the podcast that we have been posting. But we've been doing podcasts for a lot longer. And like I said, we had one podcast that not a lot of people know about. We actually had a trivia question where we gave out free books to people that could answer it. What was the name of the Back to Jerusalem podcast before it was called the Back to Jerusalem podcast? And it was called the Tom and Eugene Show. I worked with a guy for many years in the beginning years in China. Well, not the very beginning. I guess I'd been living in China for not quite a decade, maybe about 7 or 8 years before he and his family moved to China, and they worked together with us. One of my best friends, really, really loved kind of connecting with him, and we always were clowning around, having a good time, especially when we were tired. I can remember there were times traveling in China or other parts of the world like India, and we were just so zonked and depleted of energy that we would laugh at anything, like two little high school girls traveling together. He would say the littlest things and it would just set me off into this like giggle spree where I just couldn't stop laughing. And so we decided to incorporate some of our information into our regular repertoire, and we called that the Tom and Eugene Show. And now I'm looking at 10 years that we've been doing our Back to Jerusalem podcast, and it's been one of our greatest platforms for informing people. I get notes and information from people all around the world that listen to our podcast, that are moved by our podcast. And after 10 years, and I look back and wonder, were there a lot of people, that listened to our podcast? And the truth is that at one point, I think that we were getting something like 10,000 listeners per month, which is insane for a mission-based podcast that is recorded on a simple mobile phone. There's nothing added to our budget. I don't spend any money. I already have a mobile phone, right? I'm already traveling with this piece of equipment in my pocket. And so the idea of the Back to Jerusalem podcast was never to have a polished, podcast from a cubicle somewhere or a recording studio somewhere. But it was always, the intention was always to have a way of communicating with our partners directly from the field. And we don't edit the podcast. We don't try to take things out unless there's something sensitive. We never edit the podcast or change it in any way. We just kind of put it up in its raw form in all of its glory. With all of right now we have the sounds of the ocean and the wind that will be coming in. So I'm not really sure how this will actually turn out. And I never listen to our own podcast. I don't think I can stomach to listen to our own podcast. But our podcasts are done on the field in a very raw form. I do them in taxis, in buses, in hotel rooms, on a beach while on a hike. So this morning, and I'm usually out on a hike and I'm usually praying. And as I was thinking about the 10-year anniversary, I start going back and thinking about all of the things that I've seen in the last 10 years and the lives that have been touched and the people that have written to us and reached out to us and said, thank you for letting us know how to pray. Thank you for letting us know what's happening on the ground. Thank you for opening up as much as can be opened up about the Underground House Church. There's so many things that we have to be careful with when we share information with our prayer partners. There's so much information that can be manipulated by authorities to be able to find out who we're talking about, where they are, and how to detain them. So we have to be very, very careful when we share this information to keep our friends safe. And so far, after 10 years, I'm very happy to report that we have no information of anybody being detained or arrested because of this podcast. And after 10 years, I've also seen a couple of things, some good things and some bad things. I can remember one of the strangest moments in my life was traveling in Turkey. I was traveling together with Stone, who does all of our AVI. He's an amazing, if you ever watch Chasing Legacy, which is going to be coming out soon, or Chasing Revival, which is this series that we did. It's kind of a road trip Bible study series that starts in Jerusalem and follows the gospel as it goes around the world back to Jerusalem. It's the only Bible study series that I know of that actually does that. While we were doing that filming in Turkey, I was traveling together with Stone. And I remember some guy coming up random in the middle of nowhere. He just comes up and he says, "Are you Eugene Bach?" And I thought, this is interesting. He was a younger guy, clearly American. And we were in Turkey. And we were in Ephesus, and we were filming in the ancient city of Ephesus. And I said, yes, I am. It's a weird question, but yeah. And he goes, "I thought I recognized your voice. I've been a long time listener of the Back to Jerusalem podcast. And as soon as I heard your voice from like over on the other side of the like auditorium there, I realized that could be you." And so I listened a little closer and I realized that was you. That was just for someone on the other side of the planet to recognize you in Turkey. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. And I've been criticized. I've gotten a lot of hate mail for the Back to Jerusalem podcast saying that it's too long. I've had people that said, you know what, you should really write it out. So you should have your podcast in article form so we can read it. We don't like to listen to podcasts, but we like to read. We have a very small staff. And I don't even like to say staff because we actually have no staff in the traditional sense. We have no full-time staff in the traditional sense. We have missionaries that are fully engaged with Back to Jerusalem. And that's another thing. People have gotten so used to my bad language in the way that, I'm not an English professor by any stretch of the imagination. So I've gotten people in the last 10 years that will write to me and say, "I love the fact that you just said buttload on a podcast." And so I'm always getting those kind of things, but I also get hate mail as well. People that feel that the podcasts are too long, that they should be shortened, that people's attention spans are not that long. And so they feel that they want to get to the point. They click on the Back to Jerusalem podcast because we might have a title and the title interests people, and then they will just, sign off after about 10 minutes or 15 minutes and say, you know what, that was too long. I was trying to listen to the point, but you never got to the point. And I didn't want to listen to the end. And I get it. I have the same kind of impatience myself. It annoys me, like if I click on an article that is not just one article, those articles that have like a clickbait title, and you click on those and it takes you to one page and you have to click next, and it takes you to another page and you have to click next, and you go through these series, and before you even get to what the clickbait was about, you just quit and give up. And so I feel a little bad about that, because I feel, hey, I understand what you're saying, that maybe I could have just shared at the beginning of the podcast what the point was and then explain it through the rest of the podcast. But these podcasts are never planned out. There's no script. I haven't written anything. So after 10 years, I've been able to hear the voices of people that like us and don't like us, that listen to us and don't listen to us. And I'm thankful for both. I'm thankful for people that have criticized, and I'm thankful for people that listen. We've even brought critics on our podcasts in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, that people have written and said, everything that you said is absolute bollocks, then I would write to them and say, hey, come on our podcast. We will not edit anything out. I cannot tell you how many cowards there are that are keyboard heroes, but when you actually give them a chance to come on, explain their differences, and have a discussion, they chicken out. They don't want to have a conversation. They just want to fly in, criticize really quick on a sentence or so on a post on social media, and then fly out. But we have had a very few people that have said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And so we've had people that disagreed on our podcast in the last 10 years. And those have been amazing times with even those that disagree, even those that are critics. I've always considered the gospel as the foundational, concrete champion for free speech. I mean, if God doesn't stop us from voicing our opinion, even when it's against us, who are we to stop people from sharing their ideas or grievances or disagreements? I want to hear people that disagree, because I feel that as iron sharpens iron, this is how we learn from one another. Unfortunately, you have a lot of people that don't want to learn. They just want to kind of attack. And so when you come in and you're sharing with them and you're listening to them and you're bringing up points that maybe they are expressing that are just not logical, then you get people that get really upset. We've seen that in the last 10 years. When it comes to security, I've also seen people that have come out against us saying, you're sharing too much. You need to stop sharing so much because you're putting lives at risk. And we've had the opposite. You're not sharing enough because we know you're hiding something. You're fraudulent, especially. My favorite is the Back to Jerusalem pill-sized hologram Bible. The Bible that you hold in your hand and it illuminates the air in front of your face, and you can read the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation on this small pill-sized Bible. Do you know how many people around the world, even ministry leaders, that say, that's a lie, that's a fraud, you are lying to people to steal their money? And I've told them, come to any of our meetings, I will show it to you. If you come to any meeting that I speak at, I will show it to you. I've showed it to up to 100 people at one time. Now, this little small reader is only made for one person to read at a time. But it's amazing when you see like 50 to 100 Amish people come together and read from the Back to Jerusalem pill-sized hologram Bible. That's amazing. And then when I go to places and I talk about, I showed the Bible, those critics that are just so determined to attack us, that are so entrenched in their belief that I'm lying, that doesn't exist, they never actually want to show up at any of the meetings. They never want to actually say. And there's been times I've done podcasts. Guys, I've done full-length radio interviews with people where I've brought up the pill-sized hologram Bible, and the director of the program has said, we need you to send us a recording of it being used, and that we will never do. We cannot show how it is used, because that is the essence of that device. If you ever see that device or pick up that device, it is not intuitive how to use it. That's the security of it. That's the beauty of it. There's a lot of things that we have developed at the Back to Jerusalem Hackers Conference in the last, decade that we've been hosting these hackers conferences where we have hackers from around the world that come together and develop new tools for the gospel. There's so many things that they develop that I can't even talk about, because in order to share about them, I will inadvertently probably explain them. And by explaining them, I will reveal them. And by revealing them, I expose the people that are on the mission field that are using them. So therefore, I can't even talk about some of the coolest toys that we have when it comes to sharing the gospel in closed nations. But the hologram Bible, I ran it through all of our team, and I talked about how I would just share about it to keep it a secret if they would only allow me to talk about it. And I was given that permission after we went through all of the different scenarios of security. It was decided that it was safe enough to share that. And now we're looking at 9 years. We've been using the Back to Jerusalem pill-sized hologram Bible for 9 years, almost as long as we've had this podcast going. And we have zero, as far as we know, people in the field that are using it that have been exposed for having that Bible or for being known what it is. We've been able to keep it on the DL. And I'm so thankful for that, even though I've been sharing it on the podcast. I had one person who wrote to me. They are in security and they work security and missions. And I actually know people in the missions field that hire them to teach their mission team on how to maintain security. And I remember doing a podcast about Afghanistan. And this security expert wrote to me, very uncomfortable with the amount of information that I was sharing on our Back to Jerusalem podcast about Afghanistan, saying, hey, don't you know that you are risking people's lives in Afghanistan by sharing that information that you just shared? The article that you just wrote, the podcast that you just did, risks lives in Afghanistan. I know because I work there. And I offer a security class that I think that you should attend. I have a course that you could go through that would teach you how to be secure, not going on podcasts and writing out articles that blab sensitive information about what you're doing in Afghanistan that can get people's lives, it put them in danger. And I remember writing back to that person. And I said, yeah, I will attend your security class if you can do one thing. If you could tell me who the missionaries are, where they are working, what they are doing, and when they were there. You see, in that situation, I always make sure that I secure those 4 things. I make sure that the information that I'm sharing is not up to date or shared in a way where it is immediate, where people can immediately react to what I'm saying and go to the people that are actually carrying out the project. There's always some sort of manipulation of time that I'm imposing into the information that I'm sharing. It's embedded in that information so that people that are trying to specifically glean our podcast for information on how to find missionaries won't find it. So I make sure that laced, and guys, I did this in the military. Not only was I in the military and I did this kind of for a living, being in a special ops platoon, one of the things that you do is counter intel. I have 2 boys that have both been top security clearance in the U.S. military, carrying out operations right now that I'm not able to share. There are places that I can't go to right now, or I couldn't go to, travel to meet together with our missionaries, just so my children could go through their top secret security clearance so that I wouldn't put that at risk in any way. And so I said, I wrote to this person, I said, if you can explain who, what, when, where, not the why, because they know the why is mission. But if you could tell me who the missionaries were, where they were working, what they were doing, and when they were there, I will attend your course. And the person wrote back, couldn't answer any of those questions, of course. And the reason why is because I was saying back to Jerusalem missionaries, but the missionaries that we were working with were a special kind of missionary that I cannot give the details about. They were not a Westerner. They were not a foreigner. But I deliberately made sure that I didn't give away the identity. The missionaries were no longer in the region. In the region that they were working in, I wasn't even explaining. I did not explain. So there was no who, what, when, where. Also, I didn't share about what they were actually doing, the details of what they were doing. I said that it was a earthquake disaster relief effort, but I didn't say what the effort was. I gave examples of an effort. And the person I remember wrote back and they said, well, I personally am offended, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but I'm personally offended at the information that you're sharing because it's so detailed that my friends, now their lives are at risk because of what you're doing. My friends who are working with this aid organization in this area of the earthquake are there right now carrying out these projects, and now their projects are put at risk because of the information that you shared. And I wrote back and I said, could you please delete this email because I'm no longer comfortable having this conversation. You just shared with me who your friends were, where they are, that they are still there, and what they're doing. All of that information you just shared in one single email. Yeah, thank you for your lecture on security, but I don't think I'll be attending your course, Miss Security Expert. And so I get those kind of hate messages from the amount of information that we share. And I get it. There are people that are sincerely supporting Back to Jerusalem and praying for Back to Jerusalem that constantly ask, Eugene, how is it you're able to continue sharing about the work that you're doing? How is it that you're able to travel so freely inside of China? How is it that you are able to go to places like North Korea and Iran and not get caught? I mean, you've written so many books, you're doing so many podcasts, you're writing so many articles, you're speaking at so many meetings. How do you have the freedom to go back and forth? I don't know. And maybe one of these days, one of these podcasts might be done from inside a prison cell somewhere. I don't know. But as of right now, God has given me the privilege to share with you some of the challenges and heartaches and prayer requests from the persecuted church. From the persecuted church, not just here in China where I'm at now, but in the area between China and Jerusalem. This region of the world, there's so much that is happening on a daily basis that the Christian world just simply doesn't know about. And we at Back to Jerusalem try to be their voice. We try to share with you what is happening. And just carrying my phone, not making it a big production, doing it raw and elementary like this, the delivery, the medium of which I'm using is not sophisticated at all. We don't have a production at all. We don't have the ability to kind of, have a really great studio where I can sit behind a desk with a great light behind me or a really cool background in the backdrop. Though, try to get this backdrop in your office. I mean, this is God created like the best backdrop out here, even though my camera phone may not be the camera on my phone. See what I'm saying? This is not written out or edited in any way, but the camera on my phone is, not that great. And even with a substandard quality camera on my phone, an old phone, look at the backdrop here. Here in southern China, giving a podcast live on delay to people like you that are praying for us on a regular basis. And this year, 2026, is such an important year because after 10 years, I come to the conclusion that I walk in the footsteps of heroes that have done so much for the gospel. And in the last 10 years, and this has even challenged some of the podcasts that I do, because some of the podcasting that I do, I used to do from inspiration. Like I used to be together with our Chinese or our underground house church members, and they would say something that would just launch something in my head, and I would put my phone down and I would just start talking into it and immediately logging and journaling my thoughts through voice recording on my mobile phone. No microphone. I tried a little microphone that would attach to my phone so that the quality would be better. But to be honest, excuse me, to be honest, I only travel with carry-on luggage. And there are times where I'm traveling for a month, 6 weeks, 2 months at a time in several different climates, from winter snow to hot desert. And all of those clothing, I'm trying to smash into a small carry-on. So even a small extra microphone is something I'm not willing to carry. And I'm like, you know what? People aren't listening to our podcast because of quality anyway. They're not listening to our podcast because I'm a good speaker anyway. People aren't listening to the podcast because I have this great radio voice anyway. So I'm just going to go raw dog with it and use the recording mechanism on my mobile phone. And sometimes, if I can, I'll use the camera on my mobile phone. So I don't even travel with those items when I'm traveling around the world, not even with a great mobile phone or a great microphone. But I used to be inspired and sit down and immediately do a podcast. But these days, I feel a need to also do another medium and use another medium, which is writing, which is why I'm kind of addicted to both sharing and sharing via podcast and sharing with books as well. And I mean, there are times where I'm asked to be speakers in different churches, Bible studies, college groups, and I do that. I love that. I love nothing more than to share about what God is doing in the area between China and Jerusalem. And so now whenever that inspiration hits, I immediately find myself, instead of doing a podcast like I did before, writing it down. And guys, this is why I'm now in a season of my life where I'm writing almost a book every 2 months. Think about that. Almost a book every 2 months. And this year, 2026, is important for me. Not just because right now on this day, the 20th of February, the middle of Chinese New Year, not just because now is the 10-year anniversary of our podcast. Very happy about that. But also because this is the 500-year anniversary of the smuggling of the Bible illegally into England. The 500-year anniversary of the Bible being printed illegally into the English language. Guys, I'm a recipient of William Tyndale, who risked his life and gave his life to get the Bible illegally into the English language. He went away and translated in such a way that I believe was led by the Holy Spirit, that the translation that he did single-handedly ended up being translated again by experts, a team of experts, and so little of his original translation was changed because of, I believe, the Holy Spirit using him, leading him, guiding him. And then in mainland Europe, he was able to legally use the new printing press to print up these pages of the brand new Bible in the English language. And then he sent letters to England in a clandestine manner so that he could prepare the underground secret church in England that didn't line up with the authorities of the time, that said what the church could do and what they couldn't do, what Christians were allowed to do, what they were not allowed to do. And one of the things that the Christians were not allowed to do 500 years ago in England was have a Bible in their own stinking language. And William Tyndale said, we're going to change that. He defied the authorities. He said, and I'm paraphrasing again here, but I will see to it that with the Bible in the hands of a plowboy, the common plowboy will know the Bible just as well or better than the clergy in Rome. I grew up on a farm, in farmland in the middle of smack dab Indiana. Guys, in many ways, I am the fruition of his dream of having the common plowboy having the Bible in his own language, in his own hands, and knowing as much, or the ability to know as much, as the clergy in Rome or anywhere else in the known world. Tyndale risked his life, and those that worked with him risked their lives to receive the Bible. Shipments of Bibles were smuggled illegally into goods that were shipped across the English Channel. Food that was packed, grains would have pages of the Bible slipped in. They would take the Bible and they would pull out the individual pages and slip them into shipments of grain, shipments of other books, shipments of other food, clothing, materials, textiles, and send them across the English Channel. And then Christians knew where to find those secret allotments of Bibles. And then they would take them, go back home, and secretly in their home, reassemble God's word into a Bible again and have the entire Bible for them to read in their own language. And as a result, 500 years ago, Tyndale sent God's word into the hands of regular everyday people. And because of that, he was captured, strapped to a pole, strangled, and his body burned. This is the pathway that was set before us. Set before me. 500 years later, here I am on a beach in southern China. I just met with a house church leader last night. He's probably in his room resting right now. I always go for my walks early in the morning. I started my walk this morning before the sun even came up. So I'll see him later on today. And what were we talking about today? Smuggling Bibles into China. How to get God's word into the hands of more common farmer plowboys of China. This podcast helps us to share these stories directly with you. And I also get to share about the books that I'm writing, because it was about 200 years ago that we had the very first person that came to these same beaches, Robert Morrison. And he sat down like William Tyndale, and he illegally translated the Bible into the Chinese language. And he did it by himself. And I've been convinced that it was under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Why? Because much of what he translated was redone later on in later years by top Chinese language scholars. And the amount of things that they had to change was so little. They didn't have to change much from the original translation that was done by Robert Morrison. So Robert Morrison came to these beaches and gave his life. I'd have to travel a little bit far from here to a place called Macau, which is also owned by China, to be able to see his grave where he is buried. But his family, the family that sacrificed when they came here together with him, we don't know where their bones are buried because there was no marker on their grave, because their graves were not allowed by law in Macau during that time. But God knows where they're at. And I walk in the footsteps of these great giants. If anybody asks me, out of all the books that I've written, like which one kind of stands out to me the most, one of them that stands out to me more than any is the book that I did on Carl Gutzlaff. While studying about Robert Morrison, I come across the story of Carl Gutzlaff. And while also reading about Hudson Taylor, I started to see this Carl Gutzlaff name pop up, and I thought, who is this guy? And the more I studied about him and the more I read about him, the more I found a lot of bad information. People that said that he was not a good person. He was a fraudulent missionary. And yet I couldn't help but to be moved by the influence that he had on people's lives like Robert Morrison. I would read the story. I'd read in Robert Morrison's journal. So when I wrote Bury Me in China, the life story of Robert Morrison, I found myself engrossed in his journal, in Robert Morrison's journal. And I kept coming across Carl Gutzlaff's name in the journal. And that made me curious. And then I began to do some research, and I wasn't able to find much about him. And then I went to a library down in Hong Kong. And while I was there in Hong Kong, I went into the library and I began to read, some of the old missionary writings of Carl Gutzlaff, because if you go through the archives of the Hong Kong libraries, you can find these old military journals and publications. And some of them had, Carl Gutzlaff's information. And the more I read about Carl Gutzlaff, the more I was blown away by the sacrifice, how he came to the shores of China, carrying the Bible and gave everything. His story is one of the most fascinating because I feel that God gave me the opportunity to bring back his life story again, to share how he gave his life for the gospel of the Chinese. Was it a perfect life? No. But none of us have a perfect life. Even the things that we have about Robert Morrison, even though people write things about him that is all perfect throughout all of history, there was a lot of personal struggles that he shares about in his journal that revealed the true nature of who he is. And the fact is that we are all the same as what we read in the Bible. With all of the heroes that we read about, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, as we read about the first apostles of James, John, Peter, as we go through all of the different heroes of the faith that are written about in the Bible, we find that the Bible goes out of its way to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, it's very easy to write about these missionary heroes in a glorious way that glowingly records history as these people that never gave up. They were perfect all the time. They were perpetually on their knees praising God and just kind of went in this angelic way onto the mission field and gave their lives. And we should model our lives after them. But that's not realistic. It's not realistic because it's not true. And Carl Gutzlaff, I often say, is one of the greatest books that I had the opportunity to write about because his story is one of the most beautiful stories that share how you can fail God and he still use you. You can be a hero of the faith and he still use you. You can be a hero in the eyes of people and fail in the eyes of God, or be a hero in the eyes of God and fail in the eyes of the people. We have a book that's coming out this year about Robert Jermaine Thomas. I can't wait. You guys are going to love this story. You're going to love this book. If you get the chance to get the book on Carl Gutzlaff, I highly recommend it. Of course, I'm biased, but I highly recommend this book. It will change the way you think about missions. And even though I share about the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it actually gives more reason to respect these individuals. When we put ourselves in their shoes and we see our testimony in line with their walk, it lets us know that we're not alone in our failures. And it lets us know that God can use our failures for his glory. And that even though we slip and we fall, the hand of God is there to reach and lift us out, to put us back on a path of his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness, to continue completing the Great Commission, the very thing that he gave us to do. 500 years ago, I'm able to read about what God did in England. 200 years ago, I'm able to read about what God did right here on these very beaches in China. And 12 hours ago, I was able to sit down with a Chinese underground house church pastor and talk about how we today are getting the good news of Jesus Christ into these nations. This podcast allows me to share these stories together with you, to share about books before they come out, to share about behind the scenes information that you will not hear on any of our other podcasts or read in our books or read in our articles. These podcasts allow us to go behind the scenes in a very real, raw, honest way. We try to make ourselves as vulnerable as possible to our audience. Not polished, not great speakers, not prepared speeches, I'm going to be honest with you. When I was doing the hike this morning, I didn't even know what I was going to be talking about because I just knew I was happy and thankful for 10 years. And I just wanted to talk about the 10 years that we've been doing this podcast. Could have easily written a list of the memories that I have. I could have easily shared, clips from the 10 years of podcasts that we've been doing. I could have easily gone back to the podcast that we did before the 10 years of posting all the podcasts and shared some of those podcasts. I'm sure you'd get a kick out of them to see how we've changed and evolved over the years as we've grown in ministry. But after 10 years, the one thing that I can share is I'm thankful to have this medium. And it may only be 5 people that listen to our podcast. It may only be 10 people that watch this on YouTube. Wherever you're seeing this podcast or listening to this podcast, wherever you're getting it from, you may not be sharing space with a lot of other fellow listeners, or you might be. All I know is that every prayer counts. And if we can share what's happening on the field, like the pastor that I was working with 12 hours ago, like he and I working together to get Bibles into China, if we can share with you what is happening, then that will make all the difference in the world if you stop and remember and pray. I want to thank you for those of you that have been with us for 10 years, or maybe this is the very first podcast you've ever listened to. I want to thank you for downloading our Back to Jerusalem podcast or watching this on YouTube. I want to thank you for being our partners and our friends for so many years. For those of you that have been with us the entire 10 years, write to us. Let us know. We're thankful for you. And we're thankful for your prayers. Again, I'm Eugene Bach coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. God bless.